Hi, welcome to this video. We're going to be looking at ethnography and auto-ethnography in this video. They're two distinct but obviously related methodologies. So let's start with ethnography. Ethnography is the study of people in their own environment. And the quote here highlights that ethnography is both an art and a science. So like an awful lot of methodologies and research in general, it's about combining two different things. In this case, it requires systematic observation, but also artistic sensitivity to portray a group and their interactions in a rich and nuanced way. A key term on this slide is culture sharing group. Now, when we say culture, we're not just talking about nations or societies. In research terms, a culture can be any group of people who share a common language, values and practices, and particularly this practices is important than values, even if they've only been together for a short period of time. So we might be looking at a culture that perhaps has built up, for instance, in a jazz ensemble that's recently been put together, or a community choir. So it doesn't have to be something that's particularly established, but it's a place or a community that's developing and developed. What you're going to see is that any community like this is going to have a series of rules, perhaps many of those are unspoken. What's considered cool, what's considered not good. And I guess the why of ethnography is to get past our assumptions, to start to see and understand the world as the members of that group see it. So to grasp what's often called the insider's perspective, that's what we're after. So what makes that group tick? What are all of the hidden rules? So how does an ethnographer actually get that insider's perspective? Well, it requires a few core practices. The first is cultural immersion. Now, this isn't just about going and doing a few interviews and then leaving. So something like a case study where you might go and do that. With ethnography, it's about spending prolonged, meaningful time with a community. So it's a slightly different approach. This is crucial because it's going to allow you to build trust over time. And it's only over time that the deeper, obviously, or often invisible layers of a culture start to reveal themselves. This leads to the second concept, which is that of participant observation. Notice the word participant. This isn't just watching from the sidelines, but you are actually, if you're the researcher, going to become a participant in that community. So the idea is that the researcher actively takes part in the group's daily life. In essence, they become an apprentice, someone within that community. The assumption here is that you're going to learn things by doing that you couldn't possibly get from just simply watching. So you're going to learn all of those unspoken rules, the in-jokes, the frustrations, the joys, and you're going to experience that alongside the people in that community, in that group, because you're going to be doing the same things as them. A key tool for the ethnographer is the ability to keep field notes, as this is where everything's documented. And as the slide suggests, what you write down is really really essential. And you're going to observe at lots of different levels. So let's imagine the question on this slide. So what would you write down if you're actually taking part in observing an orchestral rehearsal? Well, you might well write down objective facts. So what was the conductor doing, saying? Which section perhaps was struggling or doing really well with the music? But equally, you might start talking about more subjective reflections. So perhaps there are tensions in the room between different individuals or between different groups of people. And you might be sensing that subjectively, and you might also want to document that. So at different levels, we're documenting lots of different levels here. The notes themselves, the field notes, are typically written immediately after or sometimes even during the observation. So it's important that that happens whilst things are fresh. The whole point is to get a very clear, or as possible, a clear sense of what's actually happening. Let's pivot now and let's think about auto-ethnography. So what if the culture that you want to understand is one that you're already intimately part of? What if, essentially, it's your own experience, and that's the primary window into that culture? And this is where auto-ethnography comes in. Let's break down the word itself. So auto means self, ethno for culture, and graphy for writing. So it's literally writing about the self to understand culture. In auto-ethnography, your own experience becomes the evidence. Your memories, your feelings, your journals, these are not just background context, they're the primary data for your research. The why here is crucial. This is not just about writing a diary. The goal of auto-ethnography is to take a personal story and analyse it to understand how it connects to broader social and cultural phenomena. It's going to seek to answer questions of how is my personal experience of this issue a reflection of or a challenge to wider cultural norms. It's going to make theory tangible and lived. This is what we're after. To make the distinction clear, let's use a really grounded example. Imagine first an ethnographic study of a university choir. So a researcher might spend a whole semester with that choir. They're going to attend the rehearsals, singing in the choir, travelling to competitions and interviewing members of the choir. Their research goal is to understand the group. How do they define, for instance, what a successful performance is? What are their shared values? What do they have in common? How do they use the music perhaps to build community? The focus here is on the choir's collective culture. Now, let's contrast that with an auto-ethnographic study. Here, a researcher who is a musician themselves decides to explore their own lifelong struggle, let's say, with performance anxiety. They would use their own memories, past diaries, and reflections on specific performances as their data. Their goal is to understand their personal experience. But, and this is the crucial part, they would analyse that experience to illuminate broader cultural ideas about, let's say, perfectionism, competition, or vulnerability within classical music training. So whilst one study looks outwardly at a group, the other looks inwardly to understand the self within a culture. So what does this mean for you as a researcher in practice? Well, for ethnography, the research involves gaining access and trust, being present for long periods, collecting data through participant observation and interviews, and then stepping back to analyse field notes for recurring patterns and cultural themes. For auto-ethnography, the process is more internal. It involves gathering data about yourself. This might mean digging up old journals or recordings. It also involves what's called systematic memory work. So this isn't just casual reminiscing, it's an intentional process, and it's like most research, it's structured and systematic. So, for instance, it might involve bringing to yourself program notes or photos to trigger particular memories. For instance, you could pick up the scores you used for your grade 8 exam, let's say, and then spend an hour writing about every detail you can recall from the music about the day of the exam. Let's say the temperature of the room, what your teacher said before you walked into the room. Perhaps the moments you might have felt panic during the exam, how your hands felt as you were playing, what the examiner said to you as you entered the room. We're after all of the small details and then what they mean to you. Unsurprisingly, the final written product for these two approaches often look and feel quite different. Ethnography frequently uses what we might call the descriptive approach. The writing is often in the third person. The goal is to transport the reader into the world of the group being studied. The researcher's own voice is often intentionally quietened to foreground the voices and actions of the participants. Auto-ethnography, on the other hand, is built on a personal narrative. It's almost always written in the first person, with I being essential. The story is the analysis. By carefully crafting how you tell your experience, showing the tensions and contradictions you felt, you're already doing analytical work. Both of these approaches come with profound ethical responsibilities. For ethnography, the responsibilities are primarily to the community you're studying. First, representation. When you write about, let's say, a gospel choir and the individuals within it, how do you do so faithfully without reducing them down to a very simple stereotype? This requires deep collaboration and checking your interpretations with the participants. Second, power dynamics. We've got to acknowledge that as a researcher, there is likely a power imbalance here. You're the one who's going to leave, who's going to write the thesis, and who's going to get the academic credit. Essentially, you hold the power to represent this group to the outside world, and that's a significant responsibility. And that leads to reciprocity. The research relationship shouldn't purely be extractive. You should always be asking, what am I giving back to the community for me being allowed into their lives? This could be anything from sharing your findings with them first, to offering a workshop or creating an archive of their performances. The ethical dilemmas in auto-ethnography are just as complex, but they're somewhat more personal. First is the challenge of navigating vulnerability versus narcissism. This is a common critique of the method. To be effective, the work needs to be honest and be vulnerable, but its purpose must be to illuminate a wider cultural issue, not just to be public about a diary. The researcher must constantly ask themselves the so what question. Why does my story matter to anyone else? The second issue is perhaps the most difficult: representing others in your life. Your story doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's going to involve your family, your teachers, your friends, your colleagues. There are no easy answers here, and different auto-ethnographers handle this differently. Some seek explicit permission from everyone mentioned, others anonymise heavily. Some argue that public figures or professional contexts require different standards than intimate family relationships. The key is making thoughtful, transparent decisions and acknowledging them in your writing. So, to bring this all together, when should you choose one of these approaches for your research? Well, you should choose ethnography when your research question is about the shared collective of a group. So in this context, you want to understand the culture of a specific community, for instance, a choir or perhaps a class, a music class. And within that, you're going to want to decode the unspoken rules and daily interactions inside that music learning. The focus is going to be on the we. You should use auto-ethnography when your research question is about the intersection of the personal and the cultural. You want to explore how your own journey in music has been shaped by larger forces. So, for instance, like the performance anxiety we described earlier. Or you believe that your unique personal story can offer a new perspective or challenge on an existing assumption in the field of music education. Your focus is on the I in the we. Here are some books that you might want to explore if this interests you as a form of research. So these are the key readings that you might want to engage with, and these are the references from this presentation. So have a think about this, what they mean to you. Perhaps this is something that really you find very interesting as a research approach, or perhaps it isn't. Either way, it's useful for you to know about this and to understand this and to be able to critique ethnography and auto-ethnography alongside the other research methodologies we're discussing during this course. I look forward to seeing you in our next video.